Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Speaking Bones, Dandelion Dynasty, Book 4, Chapters 18 and 19, Conspiracy and Treason by the Book. In these chapters, we have got some fallout of Gia's policies, and she just doesn't seem to see what is right in front of her face. Oh, Gia, I used to root for you, girl. What happened to you? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. What's up, Kyle? So yeah, these chapters they're really feeling like somebody has lit a fuse is really the vibe. It's the simmering and the foment before the pot boils over. I'm going to start things off at the beginning, as I tend to not do. So, Chapter 18, Conspiracy, we start off in Ginpen. And there is a background given about why Ginpen's become such an important trade hub over time. It didn't start off this way, but it is on a tributary and also tends to be like kind of, I'm going to read this here. They sought ways to promote more efficient use of Ginpen's modernized harbor. They were helped by sensible imperial tax policies, which promoted trade to make Dara more robust against natural disasters, to encourage the mingling of Dara's peoples and reduce lingering in regional prejudices. And also, this is all put into place by Kogoyelu, Prime Minister, who winds up being kind of a fucking MVP later on at the end of chapter 19. And I was fucking fist pumping because he finally tells Gia what she needs to fucking hear. He tells her most of what she needs. She's not even going to listen enough, you know? At first, the city's elders and taste-making noble families saw the influx of barely literate merchants obsessed with profit as an assault on the city's scholarly character. But over time, as imperial officials wisely encouraged merchants to donate to Ginpen's civic and religious institutions, opinion began to shift. The new money gave ancient public academies, modern lecture halls, and state-of-the-art laboratory equipment. Powerful Silkmatic generators were not cheap. Attracted scholars from afar to found private schools teaching fresh ideas, expanded existing temples, funded new shrines. The biggest new shrines were for Luan Xiaji, the great explorer, which I was like, aww. Renovated the statues of the gods and brought artists, craftspeople, folk opera troupes, street performers, and inventors from every corner of Dara into Ginpen's bustling markets. I would like to point something out, and I'm not even saying that this is a bad thing. But I do need to point it out because in this chapter, this couple of chapters in particular, I noticed it more than usual. Everything I just said is part of one sentence. I didn't even read the whole thing. I'm just going to go ahead and read the whole thing. So this is all one sentence. The new money gave ancient public academies, modern lecture halls, and state-of-the-art laboratory equipment. Powerful silk motor generators were not cheap. Attracted scholars from afar to found private schools teaching fresh ideas, expanded existing temples, funded new shrines. The biggest new shrines were for Luanzia, the great explorer. Many merchants braving the seas for profit claimed to see themselves reflected in the man's maritime exploits. And to Matazindu, the hegemon, now and probably worshipped by the marines and sailors of the navy, and scholars cramming for the imperial examinations alike, as both groups claimed courage as their defining trait, renovated the statues of the gods, and brought artists, craftspeople, folk opera troupes, street performers, and inventors from every corner of Dara into Gimpen's bustling markets. That's one sentence. I really feel like we could back off a little bit, Ken. Okay? Can I call you Ken? Let's just put a fucking period in there. Anywhere. Pick a spot. Just fucking calm down. Okay. So, let me go to Aya Mazzotti. This is rough, guys. Aya Mazzotti, the newly appointed admiral of the tributary fleet, couldn't understand how a routine tributary mission had turned into such a disaster before she had even set foot aboard her flagship. So she has this amazing outfit, and she's an admiral, and her mother was an accused traitor. She's making good. She's proving everybody wrong, getting her family's reputation back on track. And then everybody on the street is fucking cursing at her, throwing things at her. The soldiers that are with her are resentful of the fact that they are being targeted. Hundreds of scholars knelt in neat rows, holding up silk scrolls with the logograms for traitor, coward, death before dishonor. The writing knife stands with the fighting sword. And we go back in time to Princess Phyro, trying to tell her to decline the appointment. And understandably, Aya, who doesn't really have a political mind, is feeling a bit hurt that her friend doesn't seem happy for her. And we have this moment that I think is really well written. Phyro had changed a great deal in the 2 years after those hectic months in Ginpen. She still took delight in provoking insufferable Prince Gimoto, but she was more subdued and no longer obsessed about gossip and handsome actors. She turned down Aya's invitations to playhouses, claiming to be too busy. Phyro's maids told Aya the princess painted, wrote poetry, read histories, played music, and often went to the markets alone, watching the performances of folk troupes and talking to the rustic performers. Aya had no idea why Phyro found these plebeian sentimental stories interesting. All she knew was that the two of them, once inseparable as sisters, were no longer as close. And Phyro is trying to tell her everybody is against this mission. There are so many petitions. There are so many people who are unhappy with this. And Aya is just like, who the fuck cares what everybody thinks? It's what the Empress said is going to happen. She makes the rules, the end. And Phyro is like, no, that it's not that simple. That is not the end. I can't I'm trying to explain to you why it's not that simple. She says, I can tell you there's more to this than what the Empress wants. Aya resented the way Phyro sounded. So adult. I'm so glad to have your tutelage, my wise sister. I hadn't realized that you are so much more experienced with the world than I. Phyro ignored the sarcasm. Not too far off. Having traveled around Dara, I can tell you there are many who don't want this peace. The veteran societies are influential. There are more and more folk operas celebrating resistance. That was another thing that had changed. Phyro would leave on long trips by herself. These were trips to visit Widow Wasu or distant relatives, but I have found Phyro's answers about what she did on these trips evasive and vague. And yeah, there's a lot about like what she's doing that feels vaguely suspicious. She doesn't have enough details to prove anything, but she has used her authority. It says abused her authority, asking Farseers to keep her under surveillance. And they're telling her about Phyro visiting refugees. And again, who cares what all of them think? It's a fleet to deliver tribute and a treaty akin to terms of surrender. It's hardly an honor. Says who? Aya's face reddened. To achieve a peace without slaughter is the highest of victories. My mother said so. Even if my job appears to be only delivering a message, it is an important command. And this basically boils down to later on what it is that Phyro points out specifically is that Aya is the daughter of Gin Mazoti, who was a general in the war, and sending that same woman's daughter to deliver this message is even more of a message of surrender. It's like everything that Aya is attempting to do to make right her family's name and history is being undermined by this mission and what it represents, and she doesn't understand it. And yeah, I just felt so bad because I understand Aya not seeing this for what it really is and being resentful of her friend and maybe even like a little jealous, but she is letting that get in the way of what words mean, you know? So let's see. Why can't you just be happy for me? I have been picked. That's precisely why I worry. And this is why what she explains. Do you think this is actually about what you've done or not done? You really think your victories... You were picked because the Marshal and Luan Ziaji are symbols of Dara's defiance. Your being picked is the ultimate sign of submission. I thought you were my friend. I am. That's why I'm telling you what you don't want to hear. And she says basically, so you think I'm an idiot and you think a lot more highly of yourself than of me. And Phyro is like, I'm just trying to explain that there's more to this and you're not wanting to see it. And Aya goes at her hard. What have you attained in your life that isn't because of your parentage? You've been moping about because of a stupid boy who didn't like you as much as you liked him. You're as pathetic as the lovelorn girls in those silly plays. You spend your days visiting refugees who speak the Dasu Topolect so you can pretend you're talking to him, penning silly love poems he'll never read and painting pictures no one even understands. You may be content with hopeless crushes and life spent resting in the shade of your parents' glory, but I'm not. And she just doesn't understand how much Phyro is actually doing and how deep Phyro is in this whole thing. She really sees her as like a spoiled brat who doesn't have anything to fight for, has no reason to push herself. And I understand, like, it looks like that for sure, you know? So this whole thing, I know the Marshal was no traitor. What did a pampered princess know of politics and truth? And it ends with, I don't know what happened to my mother to make her rebel, but even death couldn't wash away the stain of treason down the generations. However, now I've been given the chance to be elevated into the ranks of trusted commanders of the Empire and prove my inherited nature isn't incompatible with honor. How can I refuse that? And then we come back to the present, and she's looking around at the way people are reacting to her. And she is like, why is this happening this way? She doesn't understand. The whole thing that this boils down to is people are getting riled up purposefully, and it makes sense. So we go to Pawn a month earlier, and everyone in Pawn expected Tanvanaki to beg for a second peace treaty. There was much speculation over what kind of concessions the Lyucu would offer. And then they get the message that the Dandelion Court double all tribute. And everybody freaks out and is like, this is absolutely unreasonable. There is no way we're doing this. Even though they have it to give. They have had amazing harvests. Trade has been thriving. There haven't been the kinds of natural disasters that can lay them out, Tanvanaki's tribute demand could be satisfied with ease. But Tankaru Kono and Pumayemu and ancient noble families like the Kosugi clan of Han strenuously objected. Emperor Ragen's death remained unavenged, and the people of unredeemed Dara were suffering under the yoke of Lyucu misrule. How could the Dandelion Court abandon them to more terror and anguish while living in ease, paying tribute to sustain the very regime that enslaved them? Yeah, and the thing is, we know about what it is that Gia is doing with the Zomi berries, right? But nobody else knows. And what's wild, well, you know what? I'm going to get to that. I have to be really careful about my time here because there is so much to get through in these chapters. So we go back and forth with everybody debating the virtues in either direction. And there's a very interesting thing here that I felt in my heart. There is, first of all, a conversation. Phyro is like trying to muster folks to his cause, and he's trying to act like this isn't treason. It's just doing the right thing, which is like, I mean, that can be treason though, guy, but you have to repackage it. You have to make it appealing to people. And let's see, I'm trying to find the part that I thought was coming up next that spoke to my heart is not right now. So give me a moment to get there. We go to the messenger pigeon that he sends to Weedy. And there's like a little scene with that. 2 years earlier, Zomi had introduced the Blossom Gang to Phyro, explaining to the four eccentric characters how they could be valuable allies for the young emperor. And Phyro is super sincere, and he tries to have conversations with them that are extremely straightforward and honest. He is very genuine and idealistic to a point that kind of makes Weedy a little bit nervous, actually. The conversation Weedy has a bit later with Arona and who's the other person that they're talking with? Rati. Is basically, Weedy is like, he is so trusting and he sees things in such black and white terms. And I believe that he wants to do the right things, but I don't know that he understands nuance and is ready for the ways that things can go wrong or the way people can deceive you. And what Rati boils it down to is like, so what you're saying is that he's not, oh my God, what is the word? Cynical. And then adds, you're not wrong to doubt, but we're kindred souls. Our abiding love as siblings who have found one another rather than being born of the same blood isn't motivated by thoughts of profit or advancement. but by shared ideals for the pursuit of knowledge. There is strength in simplicity, power in trust, beauty in plain speaking, and grandness of spirit in believing in ideals. I know the world is complicated, but some questions really are as simple as good and evil. I know the hearts of mankind are intricate and mazy, but I'm tired of being cynical. He's painted for me a future in which I, a Raye, matter to the world because of what I can do. Even a slim chance, a mere sliver of hope of achieving it is worth any danger. I will follow him. And that part kind of got to me because there is a sense of, well, if you're too idealistic, you're not to be taken seriously, which I definitely understand, because idealism, what can happen is that you get into a sort of purity mindset, and liberals especially are guilty of this. If people don't fall into a rigid, like, spreadsheet of exactly as progressive as everybody wants them to be, they are sort of thrown off to the side as being worthless. And as much as I want those much more leftist policies, I understand that they are unlikely to happen in one stroke. We have to be incremental a lot of the time with them. On the same, like, by the same token, I guess is the term, there is such a thing as pretending to be incremental and really making no forward progress at all, and kind of tricking everybody into complacency by behaving as if they just need to be patient when you're really not accomplishing anything. So I really understood this and understood his reservations about it. And like Phyro, you know, we've seen how little he understood the politics in that scene in the council chamber. So we know he isn't really on the level he needs to be to deal with some of the people that he's going to be dealing with on the daily to get policies set. However, if he could be like his father and hire people who are good at that, then he can grow to trust people who are good at it doing it for him. But once again, that is the sort of thing that Gia isn't interested in, because it depends on good people being selected, and she doesn't want the country to be in the hands of people. She wants it to be in the hands of systems, which I understand the appeal of as well. It's just that she's so absolutist about that. So they split up and they go into different areas doing different things with their various talents. The intricate web of alliances and rivalries at the court changed daily, sometimes hourly, and the emperor, no great politician himself, could not possibly dictate the moves of his co-conspirators from afar. He could only suggest a general strategic goal and leave the tactical implementation to his followers, trusting they had laid the necessary groundwork ahead of time. By the time the pigeon was cooing contentedly and Weedy had cleaned off the last wing of his fried chicken, the broad outlines of a plan had taken shape in the mind of the sly litigator. So, he goes to the library and he comes out with some information. The Kokru ambassador began the trip home to deliver the treaty to his king, but before he could cross the Amu-Kokru border, nobles who disagreed had staged a coup in Muning. The new ruler, the Queen Regent, had then dispatched speedy riders to the border crossing and intercepted the Kokru ambassador, seizing the signed treaty. The ensuing war lasted many years, but for Weedy what mattered was only one thing. The incident established the legal principle that a signed treaty was not effective until it had been delivered to the capital of the counterparty. The precedent was obscure, and there was little commentary, but every knife tongue worth his fee knew that what mattered wasn't the inherent heft of the precedent, but how one leveraged that weight. So yeah, we just got to keep that shit from getting delivered. So then we go to Arona and Lolotica, and they begin these performances. This is just the kind of thing that I wish we could do a little bit more of today. I know it was easier to pull off in the past when there wasn't such a complete glut of entertainment as there is now. But they put on plays of really moving stories from the Dandelion Wars. And the company, they call themselves the Women of Zudi. And the stories of the Dandelion Wars are not often done anymore because of the widespread acknowledgement that Gia doesn't want war stories being popularized. You know, she is not interested in making the military romanticized. And so most people have sort of pulled away from telling those kinds of stories. But it turns out that the people are kind of hungry for this. So this is the part that kind of got to me a little bit. This really did. The reluctance was also because the long years of peace had fostered a certain unspoken consensus among the literati. There was a collective sense of shame in the general prosperity of the reign of Season of Storms, achieved only at the cost of paying tribute to the Lyucu and abandoning the people of Dasu and Rui to the mercy of the butchers. But there was no way to address the shame without confronting the cowardice and selfishness that lurked behind each individual mask of virtue. All in Dara were guilty. To assuage their guilt, moralists and incentivists alike invented excuses to justify this state of affairs. War was the last resort of the uncivilized. True patriotism required absolute obedience to the decisions of the throne. The most efficient strategy was to incentivize the Lyucu to continue to trade with Dara. By submitting to the Lyucu, Dara had in fact achieved a superior moral victory. The right response to aggression was universal love. Learned scholars should not sully their minds by thinking about killing. One should always empathize with the enemy and engage with them to find accommodation, and so on. In Gia's Dara, in other words, it was best not to talk about war at all. There is I am on tape at one point, long ago now, talking to Rashawn about how our fixation on nonviolent protest in the United States felt elitist. And it was something that at the time, that was the only word I could come, and I didn't really understand even what I meant. But this is it. It's an excuse. It's a way of distancing ourselves from the consequences of our own actions and the suffering that we are inflicting on other people. And so many people talk about how violence isn't the answer in this very assured way, in this manner that suggests violence has never solved anything, when in fact violence has only ever solved everything. Nobody who has been oppressed was relieved of their oppression by simply appealing to the empathy of their oppressor. That has literally never happened. It has, the one nonviolent movement in the United States that began to gain traction was led by a man who was shot in the head Like, it's the sort of thing that we have just decided to rewrite history and pretend this rewrite is elevated, is somehow more civilized and morally superior. And it's a lie meant to shame those who would fight for opportunities and rights. It's a lie meant to dehumanize those people so that if a riot gets out of hand and somebody burns a building, they can be pointed to and treated as if they are animals who are out of control, instead of rightfully angry human beings who have had enough. And even within that framework, I don't know how many people are aware, but a lot of the time, the folks who cause the most damage aren't even on the side of the protesters. They're just there because they enjoy chaos, or they are literally planted from the opposing party who wants to make the protesters look bad. And this is like a proven thing. So the fact that we have made using nonviolent tactics so paramount, it makes it really easy to discredit people by pointing out how violent they are. It's a really smart move, actually, because then if you create this sort of impossible ideal and convince everybody that it's the only reasonable move, and it's something that is that delicate that you can poke a hole in it so easily and nobody will even know you did it, then they can't gain any steam and nobody will take them seriously or give them credit or hear their point of view. So it's just like the whole thing about nonviolence being the way, it's just absolute horseshit from beginning to end. It's just untrue. And there's a whole thing with like Gandhi and his movement in India, but it's like also there was a ton of violence that Indians engaged in before Gandhi really grew his huge following. I don't feel like that is meaningless. I don't feel like he's the one we pay the most attention to because of his stance on a lot of things. But he was not by any means the only activist. And I can't help but feel he is venerated for political reasons in a lot of ways, especially because he was kind of a creep, it turns out. So just setting that aside. But yeah, this just really hit for me. And it turns out the crowds really respond to this messaging. So they start to get kind of amped up, and we find out how poorly veterans are treated and the way that these stories are bringing back the respect for veterans that had been lost. Not only are veterans simply treated badly by other people who are beginning to see war as some sort of sin, but the policies that were put in place to care for veterans were stripped. And a lot of them, the very basic accommodations they were meant to be given, were not delivered or were corrupted in such a way that they couldn't be delivered. And nobody ever made good. So there are a ton of people out there who don't have anything to their name and are also injured and disabled and are looked down on by everybody because they fought in this dishonorable war and they don't have any wealth or property or security. But these stories being told has started to gain them more respect. And they start having basically veteran cards that people present for discounts and stuff at places. Just all of it begins to change over and become, it's all being viewed differently than it had been. The veteran societies, by spreading the message of heroism and sacrifice, acted as focal points to attract many endowed with a martial spirit receptive to the emperor's message. Working with a trusted staff, Mota was soon able to send a steady stream of new recruits to Tiro Kozo, swelling the ranks of Phyro's army. And this whole thing, I mean, it's just so carefully done, and I really enjoyed reading that it's not, I mean, people are being manipulated, but they're being manipulated in such a way where they were too afraid to tell the truth about how they felt before. And now they feel safe in expressing their frustration and anger about the current state of things. And then we get back to Aya Mizotti. She could not have known that by the time she arrived in Ginpen, she would be stepping into a trap years in the making. So we hear all of these people screaming at her. She is trying to tell Reza to back down. Reza's like, how the fuck can you do this? Of course we're not backing down. You can rip the treaty up and then maybe. But your mother, if she saw you today, she would be fucking embarrassed of you. And then we have this awful moment where I really felt for her. She doesn't get it. You know, I really sympathize. She's not a bad person. She is just motivated by a lot of ego. And she doesn't know how to step back and look at things in a greater picture. So she's telling her men to like start arresting everybody in the crowd. And then the crowd begins throwing food and really going back at that. They're not like attacking, but they are resisting really strongly. And all the soldiers sort of stop. And she's like, what the fuck? What are you scared of? And one of the soldiers is like, I'm not scared of shit. But this arresting disabled veterans and old people, this is not my fucking job. This isn't what I signed up for. My mom would be ashamed of me if she saw what I was doing. And Aya just bursts into tears, which is the worst move. I'm not blaming her for her emotions, but if you want to be taken seriously as the admiral of this, there is just no worse move than bursting into tears. You know, I mean, I get it. But also, ugh. So, then we go to chapter 19. And we have Thera talking to Soto. And Thera has decided to run away. And we don't see her in the rest of this chapter. But we do hear that Gia considers sending people after her. And she winds up calling off the search and being like, she's old enough. She can take care of herself. If she wants to be gone, I'm going to let her be gone. So we'll find out soon, I'm sure, what it is that she's up to. So then we go to Zomi. And she's thinking about how the fire that used to burn in her heart and how motivated she was and relentless she was. And that she knows that she has accomplished a lot in an intellectual sense, but she's just not really satisfied by any of it. And everything that she does accomplish seems to open the door to 15 other problems that she hadn't seen until that problem was solved. And it's basically a never-ending video game of side quests. And she's just kind of feeling defeated. Which, honestly, if this isn't relatable, I mean, and this part, she had not been able to help Phyro take his rightful place as Emperor of Dara. She had not been able to drive the Lyucu out of her home island. She had not been able to right all the injustices she saw. She made mistakes. She overreached. She lost touch with the very people she thought she was representing. Instead of speaking plainly and fearlessly, relying only on facts and principles, she was now resorting to plots and schemes and conspiratorial intrigue. Had she become too willing to compromise? Had the cynical air at the court smothered her heart? Had she become as useless and myopic as the officials she once despised? I'm going to say no, because if you were, you wouldn't be asking yourself these questions in the first place. You know what I'm saying? Like, there does come a point where having absolutely any self-awareness means that all hope is not lost. And we find out here that the wall of storms opened, but no ships came through at all. I wasn't getting this, guys. I misunderstood. I thought we were getting no Lyucu ships because some of Thera's people were coming through. But all it was that Thera kept the Lyucu from sailing through. And she and everyone, they are staying. Which I wasn't understanding that was what was going on. Even though I know that there was that conversation that she had with her husband. And what was his name? Oh my God, you guys, I'm so sorry. There's so many names in this, though. I'm not even that sorry. But he asks her to, like, become the Thane, and she takes that vow. But I thought that was kind of like, yes, I'm doing that for our people here, and leading them into a new phase where they will be in, you know what I mean? Like, melding these cultures and then going into Dara with this sort of new blended culture and tradition. I totally misunderstood that she straight up wasn't coming back. And she may come back eventually, but like, what is it? Every 8 years? And let's see. In that moment, Zomi knew, as certain as she had ever known anything in life, that Thera was alive, that she had succeeded in stopping another Lyucu invasion, that she had stayed in Ukyugonde because her work was not done. A surge of incandescent strength charged her from head to toe. She still believed in ideals, trusted the vision of liberation, loved the people of Dara. She was not alone. Actions reify ideals. If treason is the only path to Mutaje, then treason it must be. And she goes to the College of Advocates, and it says it was time to make the humiliation of Aya Mazotti and Ginpen do some good. And I'm real curious what that's going to look like. Then we go to Gia. And she has a dream. I'm not going to get too in the weeds about this dream. Suffice to say, it's a celebration that has a lot of different lanterns with logograms that mean different things. And Gin Mazotti is there. And Gia is watching this group of children. I say children, but like they're teens. They're working towards their certifications. And one of them in particular, Mosoa, is known as being especially brilliant. And they're asking him to like decipher this particular logogram and its meaning. And he says, let's see, this is phonetic adapter. Put them all together and you get Godawi, meaning to promote, to elevate. Despite the rather depressing visuals, this is a most auspicious logogram for all of us who seek to be elevated to the rank of Tokodawiji at the next session of the town examinations. So this woman who's sitting under it gives him a charm and says that it might give him good fortune at his exams. He smiles and thanks her. And then she's like, I'm working with the Veterans Society raising money. Would any of you like to donate? And immediately Mozoa, who was so kind and, you know, enjoying this little moment a second ago, hardens up. And she explains that her husband was a soldier and he died. I have some success with my business, so I thought I'd commission a big lantern to tell people about the scholarship fund. And Mozoa says, what is the point of sending the children of dead soldiers to school? Veterans are typically drunkards, inveterate gamblers, criminals, cripples, or soft in the head. That is why they're so poor. How can children who come from such stock amount to anything? If you give them money, they'll just piss and gamble it away. And, of course, this woman is like, what the fuck? And he just keeps going in the same vein. And I find war morally objectionable. There's no conflict that cannot be peacefully resolved through the proper study of the words of the Anno sages, the exercise of our natural human empathy, and judicious adjustment of incentives and trading opportunities. Everyone wants profit. As far as I'm concerned, all who fight in wars are equally foolish and wrong. And then caps it all off. The terror of the Lyucu has no doubt been exaggerated. We've been living with them in peace all these years. I hear native ministers over there with talent do quite well. Even if the Lyucu should rule all Dara, some of us will always find success because we have this. He pointed at his head. And this, again, really killed me. So here's the thing. Here's the thing that I only recently began to understand. Talking about how any conflict can be peacefully resolved by conversation, talking it out, empathizing. That only works if both parties are prepared to engage that way. Okay? And I know that sounds really simple, but it's super not. So this is the thing with our current climate in the United States, is that Democrats have been trying to reach across the aisle forever, for fucking ever, because they keep thinking that there is going to be some magical thing that they can say to convince folks on the other side to be more empathetic and more generous and more moral in a what is the right thing to do, not moral in the what the Bible says to do kind of way. And it has never worked, and they keep doing it. Meanwhile, you have got those people they're trying to reach out to who literally see Democrats as the enemy. And the Democrats are trying to we have to humanize these people and, really just have conversations with them and open a dialogue. They don't want that, though. They aren't interested in that. I'm not trying to say that those conversations aren't worth having. I'm saying that these arguments usually are actually in bad faith because the person you're trying to convince is just smirking and wasting your time with no attempt at listening or understanding. So this whole thing about all you need to do is have a conversation on a one-to-one level with people, sure. But when you start to get into tribal politics and folks getting deeply entrenched in us versus them and conspiracy theory shit, that stops being a factor. And those aren't people you can reason with or talk to because they see you as someone who is inherently trying to swindle them. And they're coming at you as such with the attitude of, I'm not going to let you get one over on me. And there's no way to work with that. It doesn't work. So this guy is he has this ideal, which of course really comes down to huge privilege. But, he doesn't see that the Lyucu are drowning infant children and literally tearing people apart, like by hand. He doesn't see it and actually believes it's all exaggerated, which is another key thing, is if you keep people insulated enough from the consequences of these things, they begin to doubt the consequences even exist. And that's kind of part of the key thing, is if you make marginalized people, discredit them enough, nobody actually thinks there's a problem. They think those folks are just whiners and that they're making things up. They're exaggerating their experiences. They're using it as an excuse for the real reasons they're not succeeding, like drinking, like gambling, like low intelligence. It really is just clockwork, man. It's so what this fucking dream ends with Gin and Gia and them talking about this kid and what he represents. And Gia actually says that she would rather Dara be full of guys like that than warriors. Which I can't understand that thought process. He thinks other people are lesser. He genuinely believes that people who are suffering and impoverished deserve it. And you think that's a preferable outcome? Really? And what Gia says is essentially, you are not going to find anybody willing to compromise within the Lyucu. And the people of Dara are too traumatized. They're never going to change the way that they see the Lyucu. They will measure success not by battles won, but by how many people of Dara they can kill before they can kill no more. And I don't understand how she can say that, but then try and fight for peace, which I guess this comes down to her poisoning the zombie berries, which she doesn't tell Gin about. But what she's proposing is basically, I am going to inflict this horrific suffering in another way and claim that as preferable to outright war, which is truly wild. That is a crazy stance to take. I'm going to cause this illness in people from a drug that they can't cure, that will kill them painfully and horribly. And I will say this was cleaner and better. What in the hell is wrong with you? Really? You know, like, ugh, God. And she goes on talking about like how the idea of an invasion can't be even acknowledged if people get too zealous. Let's see, if veterans were esteemed and honored, if Imuri's song were chorused as a patriotic anthem, it would be natural for the people to feel roused to war, to account little of its cost. That's why I've starved the military, neglected veterans. The people of Dara must not be allowed to think a military invasion is the answer. But to treat the military as though they were the enemy, to subject the veterans to contempt and chill their hearts, you see what happens when you carry that suspicion too far. And Gia's like, well, I've made mistakes, but then this killed me. Too little investment in defense can be easily remedied in a crisis, for there will always be brave men and women like you willing to take up the banner of Dara against our enemies. Wow. So, like, maybe I'm fucking up, but I can always depend on people to come up and fight, which is like, first of all, that's a bold statement. You don't know they're going to be on your side, my friend. And secondly, I'm going to discount it and vilify it, but I will be willing to take advantage of it if I need to. Ew, fuck you. The opposite error of trusting the army too much is a far more perilous condition for the body politic. Courage can all too easily metastasize into a darker ambition with no cure. Yeah, it can. It doesn't always, and that's kind of what it comes down to, is that Gia doesn't have faith in people, and Gin feels like that's unwarranted. She's like, you just see the worst possible outcome, and you're trying to, like, bank against that happening when there's no real evidence that we're headed in that direction. You just have a paranoia about it. You speak of broad trends as though they are certainties. You speak of historical patterns as though they dictate the future. I wish I could have your faith, said Gia, but I cannot gamble with the lives of the people of Dara. But you are, though. You are anyway. And Gin even says, you're saying you're not gambling and that you don't want to do this, but you're making a decision anyway. And Kogoyelu says that later as well. So Kogo comes to see her, and here it is. I'm trying to find the spot where because there's so much like in between here before their conversation really begins. More petitions from the College of Advocates complaining about the treaty. She scanned the columns wordlessly. She set the scroll down, picked up a second one, and we get a little like aside here about this amazing portrait of Risana that Gia took from Phyro and put in this like temple when it had been in his room. And I'm just like, God, she really is kind of unforgivable, you know, like just cruelties to manipulate him in a way that is it's completely for her benefit, you know. I just it's so wild how I can have still a little sympathy for her and still just despise her. So there is no such thing as law when it comes to relations between states. All that matters is power. Do you think the Lyucu care about these precedents? The treaty has been signed. The debate is over. The Lyucu may not care, but the Dandelion Court does. There's a building consensus among the ministers and generals that since the treaty has not been delivered, debate isn't over. What's the point of further debate? We've all heard everything we need to hear. A decision has been made, not one that takes into account the new argument. The people have spoken. The advocates describe vividly the scale and vehemence of the protests in Ginpen. And Gia says, why did she have to march through the streets as though she were returning from a triumph, making herself a convenient target? She should have relied on stealth. And I'm like, why would she think that? You gave her a juicy appointment and a splashy uniform. Of course she's gonna, you know, like, Gia is acting as if, and I have to assume that, like, some of that was planted as a way to purposely fuck Aya up, but Gia clearly misread how to depend on Aya or the ways in which Aya would operate if she thought it wasn't going to go that way and Aya wasn't going to take this huge honor and run with it. What she saw as a huge honor. So even if some of the veterans have been manipulated, it doesn't make their sentiments inauthentic. To lure all the fish into the weir may be a trick, but that only works if the river is already full of fish. The people of Dara are speaking out through multiple channels. Are you telling me there'll be mutiny if I refuse? Is this a threat? The protests have remained peaceful. If this is considered rebellion or treason, then it's rebellion within the lines. Treason by the book. The people are not threatening but pleading. She tried one last time. You know as well as I do why peace is the only course. You've backed me against Phyro for so many years. What has changed? The voice of the people. You and I have tried to maintain this peace, thinking it's for the greater good, but we are old, and perhaps our wisdom has grown outdated. How can we know the Lyucu will never surrender? How can we know the enslaved people of Dasu and Ryu will not succeed in an uprising when we attack? How can we be so sure that Phyro, because he is inexperienced, must be wrong, and that we, because we have seen much, must be right? He wants to gamble with the lives of soldiers. How can we know they don't wish to gamble on their own? To deny them that chance is also making a chance for them. You've converted to his idealized militarism, and now you're finding reasons to justify that leap of faith. And Kogo says Phyro's opinion isn't what matters. The people of Dara are telling you. And she tries to say they don't get it. The people saying this are a minority. I'll send a navy to scatter fishing boats. I'll break up protests. And he calls her out. You have always wanted a Dara in which it doesn't matter who holds the seal, because the hand that holds the seal must be guided by the voice of the people. Now that your vision has been realized, will you embrace it or shrink back in fear? The people do not wish to live like cattle and sheep, to be milked and fleeced by the Lyucu. If you defy the will of the people, then you'll be a sovereign in name only, a mere tyrant. Woo! He just said that shit to her face. Kogo, that was some balls you had there, ma'am. Good for you. Good for you. Gia began to laugh, a sound more horrifying than sobs. If only I had a little more time. The amount being shipped by Tifanhuto still isn't enough, though I've come so close. But the people have spoken. And she says to summon Phyro, and that is the end of the chapter. And all I could think was, if they engage in this war and this drug is out there, how is that going to affect Dara? Because I already saw that some of those berries were being distributed to Dara people, and God knows what that's wreaked so far. We haven't been back to see. But they were still contained on those two islands. If we engage in war and there's crossing over more and more, I feel like we're going to start seeing the addiction spread pretty badly. I don't think she can just recall her shipments and stop that from happening. And I'm not sure she would anyway, because I'm not sure she can predict what's going to happen. I don't know if she sees that. I'm very preoccupied by the spiked berries. I just really am. I'll admit that. I bring it up every episode. It's just this thing in the background looming over all of this stuff. And it's such an unknown quantity. We have had so many books so far, and so many intricate battles and political machination. We've never had something that is an inanimate object that wreaks its own havoc the way that a drug does. This is a completely new factor, and I just genuinely don't know what to expect. So I'm really, really distracted by it. But anyway, all right, I got to wrap up. Thank you again, Kyle, for commissioning this. Thank you to Ms. T for hanging out in the chat. Ms. T says the suffragettes were straight terrorists. Yeah. Unfortunately, they were also fucking white supremacists. But, nothing's perfect, I guess. Anyway, all right, guys. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
Unspoiled Network podcast.